In the depths of time, where history blends with legend and memory fades into myth, there lies a story that has captivated humanity for over 2 millennia. It is the tale of a civilization so advanced, so powerful, and so mysterious that its very existence continues to spark debate among scholars, archaeologists, and dreamers alike. Tonight, as you settle into rest, let us journey together into the enigma of Atlantis, a story that may be pure imagination, or perhaps a distant echo of something real that once graced our world. The year was approximately 360 BCE, in the bustling intellectual heart of ancient Athens. A philosopher named Plato sat in his academy, surrounded by eager students who hung upon his every word. Plato, already renowned for his profound wisdom and innovative thinking, was crafting what would become 2 of his most influential dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. Little did he know that within these philosophical works, he would plant the seed of a mystery that would grow and flourish in human imagination for thousands of years to come. As the Mediterranean sun filtered through the columns of his school, Plato began to weave a tale that he claimed had been passed down through generations, from the great Athenian statesman Solon, who had learned it from Egyptian priests during his travels to the ancient city of Sais in the Nile Delta. According to Plato's account, these wise priests possessed records stretching back 9,000 years before, Solon's time records that spoke of a mighty island empire that had once dominated the seas beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. This empire, the priests had told Solon, was called Atlantis, named after its first king, Atlas, son of the sea god Poseidon. The island itself was a marvel of engineering and natural beauty, larger than Libya and Asia combined, situated in the Atlantic Ocean, beyond the familiar waters of the Mediterranean world. Its people, the Atlanteans, had built a civilization that surpassed all others in wealth, power, and technological advancement. But Plato's tale was not merely one of wonder and achievement. It was, at its heart, a cautionary story about the corrupting influence of power and the inevitable fall that awaits those who abandon virtue in favor of conquest and material excess. The Atlanteans, once noble and just, had gradually become warlike and ambitious, seeking to expand their dominion across the known world. Their hubris ultimately led to their destruction, as the gods themselves intervened to punish their arrogance. In a single day and night of catastrophic earthquakes and floods, the entire island of Atlantis vanished beneath the waves, leaving behind only treacherous shoals that made the Atlantic Ocean impassable. This divine retribution occurred, according to Plato's timeline, approximately 9,600 years before his own era, placing the destruction of Atlantis around 9,600 BCE, in the depths of what we now call the Neolithic period. The vivid detail with which Plato described this lost civilization was remarkable. He spoke of concentric rings of land and water surrounding a central island, connected by bridges and tunnels that allowed easy movement throughout the empire's capital. The royal palace stood at the very heart of this design, surrounded by temples dedicated to Poseidon and other gods. The Atlanteans had mastered metallurgy, creating alloys unknown to Plato's contemporary world, and they had developed sophisticated systems of government, agriculture, and military organization. Their wealth came from abundant natural resources, precious metals, exotic woods, and fertile soil that supported both crops and livestock. The climate was perpetually mild, allowing for year-round agriculture and supporting a population that numbered in the millions. The Atlantean navy was vast and powerful, consisting of 1,200 ships crewed by skilled sailors who could navigate the treacherous waters of the open ocean with ease. Yet as Plato told this tale to his students, was he presenting historical fact, philosophical allegory, or pure fiction? This question has haunted scholars since ancient times. Even in Plato's own era, some listeners wondered whether the story was literally true or whether it served as a vehicle for deeper philosophical truths about justice, power, and the ideal state. Aristotle, Plato's most famous student, believed that his teacher had invented Atlantis as a philosophical device, famously noting that Plato made Atlantis appear and then made it disappear. This skeptical view suggested that the story was entirely fictional, created to illustrate abstract concepts about political philosophy and moral decline. However, other ancient writers took the account more seriously. The geographer Strabo, the historian Plutarch, and the philosopher Proclus all treated Atlantis as potentially historical, though they debated various aspects of Plato's description. Some suggested that the story might be based on real events that had been distorted over centuries of oral transmission, while others proposed that Plato might have combined multiple historical sources into a single narrative. As centuries passed and Plato's works were copied and translated across the ancient world, the story of Atlantis took on a life of its own. Medieval scholars rediscovered the tale through Arabic translations of Greek texts, and Renaissance thinkers began to speculate about whether the newly discovered lands of the Americas might be connected to the lost continent. The age of exploration brought new possibilities and theories. When Spanish conquistadors encountered sophisticated civilizations in Mexico and Peru, some wondered whether these might be descendants of Atlantean refugees. The similar pyramid structures, advanced astronomical knowledge, and sophisticated urban planning found in Mesoamerican and Andean cultures seemed to echo the descriptions of Atlantean achievements. But let us return to that classroom in ancient Athens, where Plato first spoke these words that would echo through millennia. Picture the philosopher, now in his 70s, his beard white with age and wisdom, his eyes still bright with intellectual curiosity. Picture the philosopher, now in his 70s, his beard white with age and wisdom, his eyes still bright with intellectual curiosity. As he spoke of Atlantis, his voice carried the weight of conviction, as if he truly believed in the reality of this distant civilization. Let us listen more closely to his words, and allow our minds to drift back through the mists of time to envision this remarkable island empire as Plato described it. The island of Atlantis, according to the ancient account, was a masterpiece of both natural beauty and human engineering. Imagine, if you will, a vast circular landmass rising from the deep blue waters of the Atlantic, its shores kissed by gentle waves that had traveled across thousands of miles of open ocean. The island's most striking feature was its unique geography, a series of concentric rings alternating between land and water. That created a natural fortress and a marvel of urban planning that would not be seen again until the modern era. At the very center of this extraordinary design lay a circular island, approximately 50 stadia in diameter roughly, 6 miles across, where the original settlement had been established by Poseidon himself. Here, the sea god had fallen in love with a mortal woman named Cleito, and to protect her and their future children, he had carved the land into these protective rings. 3 rings of water, each separated by rings of land, surrounded this central sanctuary, creating a series of natural moats that made the capital virtually impregnable to ancient warfare. The Atlanteans, inheriting both divine favor and human ingenuity, had not been content to leave their capital in its natural state. Over countless generations, they had transformed these rings into a wonder of engineering that surpassed anything in the known world. Massive bridges, constructed from blocks of stone quarried from the island itself, spanned the water channels, connecting each ring to the next. These were not simple wooden structures, but magnificent stone causeways wide enough for multiple horse-drawn chariots to pass side by side. Even more impressive were the tunnels that ran beneath the water channels. The Atlanteans had somehow mastered the art of underwater construction, creating passages large enough for their largest ships to sail through. These tunnels were lined with brass and tin, metals that were abundant on the island, and they were illuminated by an ingenious system of mirrors and crystals that captured and reflected sunlight throughout the passageways. The harbor of Atlantis was a sight that would have taken your breath away. Ships from across the known world crowded its docks. Egyptian vessels with their distinctive square sails, Phoenician trading ships loaded with purple dye and precious goods, mysterious craft from distant lands beyond the Pillars of Hercules. The constant sound of commerce filled the air, the creak of rope and timber, the calls of merchants in a dozen different languages, the splash of oars as smaller boats maneuvered between the larger vessels. The architecture of Atlantis reflected both the island's natural resources and the sophisticated aesthetic sensibilities of its inhabitants. The buildings were constructed primarily from white, black, and red stone, quarried from different parts of the island and arranged in pleasing geometric patterns. The white stone gleamed like marble in the sunlight, while the black stone provided dramatic contrast, and the red stone added warmth and richness to the overall effect. But it was the use of metals that truly set Atlantean architecture apart. The island was blessed with abundant deposits of precious metals, including one that Plato called aurichalcum, a mysterious substance that he described as second only to gold in value and beauty. This metal, which glowed with its own inner fire, was used to cover the walls of the most important buildings, creating structures that seemed to burn with divine light when touched by the sun's rays. The royal palace, situated at the very heart of the central island, was the crown jewel of this architectural marvel. Its walls were covered entirely in aurichalcum, creating a sight so magnificent that visitors from distant lands would fall to their knees in awe upon first glimpsing it. The palace complex included not only the royal residences, but also the great temple of Poseidon, where the kings of Atlantis would gather to perform sacred rituals and make decisions that affected their vast empire. This temple was a structure of impossible grandeur, its exterior walls covered in silver and its pinnacles crowned with gold. Inside, a massive statue of Poseidon stood in a chariot drawn by 6 winged horses, surrounded by 100 sea nymphs riding dolphins. A god's head nearly touched the ceiling of the temple, and the entire figure was crafted from ivory and gold, creating an image of such divine majesty that even hardened warriors would weep upon seeing it. The society that flourished within this magnificent setting was equally remarkable. The Atlanteans had developed a sophisticated system of government that combined monarchical authority with democratic principles. 10 kings, all descendants of Poseidon's 10 sons, ruled different regions of the empire, but they met regularly to discuss matters of common concern and to ensure that their individual domains remained in harmony with the greater good. These royal councils were conducted according to ancient rituals that emphasized the sacred nature of their authority. The kings would gather in the temple of Poseidon at sunset, each wearing robes of deep blue that reflected their connection to the sea god. They would begin their deliberations with the sacrifice of a bull, chosen from a sacred herd that roamed freely within the temple precincts. The animal was selected without weapons, using only ropes and nets, ensuring that the creature came willingly to its fate. The blood of the sacrifice was mixed with wine in golden bowls, and each king would drink from this mixture, while swearing sacred oaths to uphold justice and maintain the ancient laws of their civilization. Only after these rituals were complete could they begin to discuss the affairs of state, and all their decisions had to be unanimous, a requirement that encouraged careful deliberation and prevented hasty or selfish actions. The common people of Atlantis lived lives of unprecedented prosperity and cultural refinement. The island's fertile soil, enriched by volcanic activity and blessed with a perpetually mild climate, produced abundant harvests of grains, fruits, and vegetables. Vast herds of cattle grazed in meadows that remained green throughout the year, while flocks of sheep provided wool for the island's skilled weavers. The Atlantean navy was the pride of their civilization and the foundation of their power. 1,200 ships of various sizes patrolled the waters around their empire, from swift scout vessels that could outrun any enemy to massive warships capable of carrying hundreds of warriors into battle. These ships were marvels of naval engineering, constructed from woods that grew nowhere else on Earth and powered by both sail and oar with an efficiency that allowed them to travel vast distances across the open ocean. Yet for all their achievements, for all their wealth and power, the Atlanteans carried within themselves the seeds of their own destruction. The very abundance that blessed their island paradise would eventually become a curse. Yet for all their achievements, for all their wealth and power, the Atlanteans carried within themselves the seeds of their own destruction. The very abundance that blessed their island paradise would eventually become a curse, as prosperity bred arrogance and power corrupted the noble hearts of those who had once been worthy of divine favor. In the early generations following their founding, the Atlanteans had been a people of remarkable virtue. They possessed, according to Plato's account, a divine nature inherited from their ancestor Poseidon, which made them naturally inclined toward justice, wisdom, and moderation. They were content with their island paradise and lived in harmony with both the natural world and their neighbors across the sea. Their wealth was used not for personal aggrandizement, but for the common good, building magnificent temples, creating works of art that celebrated the gods, and maintaining the elaborate infrastructure that made their civilization possible. These early Atlanteans understood that their gifts came with responsibilities. They saw themselves as stewards of their island as natural resources and guardians of the ancient wisdom that had been passed down from their divine ancestors. Their laws emphasized the importance of humility before the gods, respect for the natural order, and care for the welfare of all citizens, regardless of their social status. But as centuries passed and generations succeeded one another in peaceful prosperity, something fundamental began to change in the Atlantean character. The divine spark that had once burned brightly in their souls grew gradually dimmer, diluted by countless generations of intermarriage with purely mortal bloodlines. Where once they had felt awe when contemplating their blessings, they began to feel entitlement. Where once they had approached their wealth with reverence, they now regarded it as their natural right. The transformation was subtle at first, manifesting in small changes that seemed harmless in isolation. The kings began to compete with one another in displays of luxury, each striving to outdo his peers in the magnificence of his palace or the extravagance of his festivals. Merchants, grown wealthy from trade with distant lands, demanded political influence to match their economic power. Military commanders, accustomed to easy victories over less advanced neighbors, began to dream of greater conquests and more glorious campaigns. The great harbor of Atlantis, once a peaceful center of legitimate commerce, gradually became a staging ground for increasingly aggressive expeditions. Ships that had once carried goods and ambassadors now sailed forth loaded with weapons and soldiers. The Atlantean Navy, originally built for exploration and defense, transformed into an instrument of conquest and domination. As their military expeditions grew more frequent and more successful, the Atlanteans began to see themselves as inherently superior to other peoples. Their advanced technology, their organizational skills, and their accumulated wealth seemed to prove that they were destined to rule over lesser civilizations. The idea that other cultures might have their own wisdom, their own valid ways of life, became increasingly foreign to the Atlantean mindset. This growing arrogance manifested most clearly in their treatment of conquered territories. Where once they had been content to establish trading relationships and cultural exchanges with distant lands, they now sought direct political control. Local rulers were replaced with Atlantean governors. Native customs were suppressed in favor of Atlantean practices. And the wealth of conquered regions was systematically extracted to feed the ever-growing appetites of the island empire. The very success of these conquests served to accelerate the moral decline of Atlantean society. Each victory brought new wealth, new slaves, and new territories to exploit, but it also brought new temptations and new opportunities for corruption. Young Atlanteans, seeing the ease with which their armies dominated other peoples, lost respect for the ancient virtues of moderation and justice that had once defined their civilization. The sacred rituals that had once bound the 10 kings together in common purpose began to lose their meaning. The unanimous consent that had been required for all major decisions became increasingly difficult to achieve, as individual rulers pursued their own ambitions rather than the common good. The bull sacrifices continued, and the ancient oaths were still sworn, but the words had become empty formalities, recited without understanding or commitment. The gods, observing these changes from their celestial realm, watched with growing displeasure as their chosen people abandoned the virtues that had made them worthy of divine favor. Zeus, the king of the gods and ultimate authority over all moral law, convened a council to determine what action should be taken. The other deities, having witnessed the gradual corruption of Atlantean society, agreed that intervention was necessary to prevent the spread of this moral contagion to other parts of the world. The decision to destroy Atlantis was not made in anger, but in sorrow. The gods had invested so much hope in this civilization, had blessed it with such abundance and power, that its failure represented a cosmic tragedy. Yet they recognized that allowing the Atlanteans to continue on their present course would ultimately cause even greater suffering, as their empire expanded and their corruption spread to contaminate other cultures. The method of destruction was chosen to reflect both the magnitude of the crime and the source of Atlantean power. Since they had received their greatest blessings from Poseidon, god of the sea, it was fitting that the sea should reclaim what had been given. Since they had abused the volcanic wealth of their island, the earth itself would rise up to devour their palaces and temples. The end, when it came, was swift and terrible. On a day that had begun like any other, with merchants preparing their ships for profitable voyages and soldiers drilling for new campaigns of conquest, the very foundations of the island began to tremble. At first, the tremors were mild, barely noticeable to people accustomed to the occasional seismic activity that was common in their volcanic homeland. But the shaking grew stronger, and within hours, it became clear that something unprecedented was occurring. The carefully engineered channels that separated the concentric rings of the capital began to overflow as massive waves, generated by underwater earthquakes, crashed against the protective barriers. The magnificent bridges that had stood for millennia cracked and groaned under stresses they had never been designed to withstand. In the royal palace, the 10 kings gathered in emergency session, their ancient ritual forgotten in the face of imminent catastrophe. But before they could even begin their deliberations, a tremor more violent than any before shattered the temple of Poseidon. The great statue of the sea god, crafted from ivory and gold, toppled from its pedestal and crashed to the marble floor, its divine face shattered beyond recognition. The destruction spread outward from the capital like ripples on a pond. The outer rings of the city, home to hundreds of thousands of citizens, were inundated as the rising seas overwhelmed their defenses. The great harbor, once crowded with ships from across the known world, became a churning maelstrom that swallowed vessels and their crews without mercy. On the outlying parts of the island, where farmers and herders had lived in peaceful prosperity for countless generations, volcanic fissures opened in the earth, spewing forth clouds of ash and streams of molten rock. The fertile fields that had fed the empire's millions withered and burned, while the sacred groves where the gods had once been honored were consumed by supernatural flames. The Atlantean navy, scattered across the oceans on various missions of conquest and trade, watched helplessly from distant waters as the towering column of smoke and ash that marked their homeland as destruction rose high into the sky. Some ships attempted to return, hoping to rescue survivors or salvage something from the catastrophe, but they found only empty ocean where their magnificent island had once stood. In a single day and night, everything that the Atlanteans had built over thousands of years vanished beneath the waves. The concentric rings of their capital, the golden temples, the orichalcum-covered palaces, the sophisticated infrastructure that had been the wonder of the ancient world, all of it disappeared into the depths, leaving behind only dangerous shoals and treacherous currents that would make the Yonne. Atlantic Ocean impassable for generations to come. And so, in the span of a single day and night, the greatest civilization the world had ever known vanished without a trace, leaving behind only memories, preserved in the sacred records of distant Egypt and whispered legends that would echo through the corridors of time. The few Atlantean ships that survived, scattered across the world's oceans, carried with them only fragments of their former glory, refugees without a homeland, witnesses to a catastrophe beyond comprehension. But perhaps this is where our story truly begins, rather than where it ends. For in the millennia that followed Plato's account, the tale of Atlantis would prove to have a life far more enduring than the civilization he described. As the ancient world gave way to new empires and new ways of thinking, each generation would rediscover this mysterious story and ask the same fundamental question: was Atlantis real? The Egyptian priests who supposedly preserved this ancient record were renowned throughout the Mediterranean world for their wisdom and their meticulous attention to historical detail. For over 3,000 years, they had maintained temples and libraries that served as repositories of human knowledge, recording everything from astronomical observations to the genealogies of pharaohs. If anyone could have preserved accurate information about a lost civilization, it would have been these keepers of memory in the land of the Nile. Yet even in Plato's own time, the historical accuracy of the account was questioned. The great philosopher had a well-known tendency to use fictional scenarios to illustrate philosophical points, and many of his contemporaries suspected that Atlantis was simply another of these educational devices. The numbers in his account, the vast size of the island, the incredible age of the civilization, the precise timing of its destruction, seemed almost too neat, too perfectly calculated to drive home his moral lessons about the dangers of unchecked power and moral corruption. As the centuries passed, and scholars gained access to more historical records from across the ancient world, some began to wonder whether Plato might have based his story on real events, even if he had embellished the details for dramatic effect. The ancient Mediterranean was, after all, a region where civilizations regularly rose and fell, where natural disasters could indeed destroy entire cultures, and where the boundaries between history and legend were often blurred by the limitations of ancient record-keeping. The first serious attempts to locate a historical basis for Atlantis focused on the eastern Mediterranean, where archaeologists were beginning to uncover evidence of sophisticated Bronze Age civilizations that had been forgotten for thousands of years. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, excavations on the Greek island of Crete revealed the remains of the Minoan civilization, a culture that had flourished from approximately 3000 to 1100 BCE, and had indeed possessed many of the characteristics that Plato attributed to Atlantis. The Minoans had been master seafarers, whose ships had dominated Mediterranean trade routes for centuries. Their capital at Knossos was a marvel of ancient engineering, featuring multi-story buildings, sophisticated plumbing systems, and elaborate frescoes that depicted a society of remarkable artistic achievement. Most intriguingly, the Minoan civilization had indeed suffered a catastrophic collapse around 1500 BCE, apparently triggered by a massive volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Thera, modern-day Santorini. This volcanic catastrophe had been one of the most powerful eruptions in recorded human history, comparable to the explosion of Krakatoa in 1883, but far more devastating in its impact on human civilization. The eruption had generated enormous tsunamis that devastated coastal settlements throughout the eastern Mediterranean, and the resulting ash clouds had caused crop failures and climate disruption across much of the ancient world. Could this be the kernel of truth around which Plato had constructed his tale of Atlantis? Some scholars began to argue that the philosopher had taken genuine historical memories of the Minoan collapse and transformed them into a cautionary tale suitable for his philosophical purposes. The timeline didn't match. The Minoan collapse had occurred roughly 900 years before Plato's time. Not 9,000, but such discrepancies could easily be explained as errors in transmission or deliberate exaggeration for dramatic effect. The location was also problematic, since Crete lay within the Mediterranean rather than beyond the Pillars of Hercules in the Atlantic Ocean. But perhaps these scholars suggested the geographical details had been altered to make the story more mysterious and remote, placing the lost civilization in the dangerous waters beyond the known world rather than in the familiar environs of the Greek islands. Other researchers looked beyond the Mediterranean for possible Atlantean connections. The discovery of sophisticated pre-Columbian civilizations in the Americas sparked speculation that these might represent either Atlantean colonies or the destinations of Atlantean refugees who had escaped their homeland's destruction. The similarities between Old World and New World architectural styles, particularly the prevalence of pyramid structures in both Egypt and Mesoamerica, seemed to suggest some form of ancient cultural contact that might support the reality of Atlantean maritime expeditions. The Maya, with their advanced astronomical knowledge and sophisticated writing system, appeared to possess wisdom that could have derived from contact with an older, more advanced civilization. The Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, built on an island in Lake Texcoco and connected to the mainland by a system of causeways, bore striking resemblances to Plato's description of Atlantean urban planning. Even more intriguingly, many Native American cultures preserved flood legends that seemed to echo the story of Atlantis, describing the destruction of an earlier world by divine wrath expressed through natural catastrophe. The age of European exploration brought new theories and new candidates for Atlantean locations. Spanish conquistadors, encountering the sophisticated civilizations of the Inca in Peru, marveled at engineering achievements that seemed to rival those attributed to the Atlanteans. The massive stone blocks of Sacsayhuaman and Machu Picchu fitted together with such precision that a knife blade could not be inserted between them, demonstrated technological capabilities that challenged European assumptions about the development of human civilization. As geological and oceanographic knowledge expanded, some researchers began to take seriously the possibility that large landmasses might indeed have existed in the Atlantic Ocean and subsequently vanished beneath the waves. The discovery of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a massive underwater mountain range that runs down the center of the Atlantic, suggested that the ocean floor was geologically active and capable of dramatic changes over long periods of time. The theory of continental drift, proposed in the early 20th century, revealed that the Earth's landmasses were in constant motion, drifting across the planet's surface over millions of years. While these movements were far too slow to account for the sudden destruction that Plato described, they raised the possibility that ancient civilizations might have developed on landmasses that no longer existed in their original form. But perhaps the greatest mystery of Atlantis lies not in any specific geographical location or historical civilization, but in the power of the story itself to capture human imagination across so many centuries and cultures. But perhaps the greatest mystery of Atlantis lies not in any specific geographical location or historical civilization, but in the power of the story itself to capture human imagination across so many centuries and cultures. Why does this tale of a lost paradise continue to resonate so deeply with people from every walk of life? What is it about the idea of Atlantis that speaks to something fundamental in the human experience? The 20th century brought new tools and new methods for investigating the Atlantis mystery. Advances in underwater archaeology, satellite imaging, and geological dating techniques opened up previously impossible avenues of research. For the first time in human history, scientists could actually explore the ocean floors where Atlantis was supposed to have vanished, mapping underwater mountain ranges and analyzing sediment cores that might preserve evidence of ancient catastrophes. Marine archaeologists began to discover that the ocean depths were indeed littered with the remains of lost civilizations, though none as dramatic as the Atlantis of Plato's imagination. Shipwrecks thousands of years old were found perfectly preserved in the cold, oxygen-poor environment of the deep sea. Entire harbors, submerged by rising sea levels or geological subsidence, were mapped and explored by submersible vehicles. These discoveries proved that the oceans had indeed swallowed many traces of human civilization, lending credibility to the general concept of lost lands beneath the waves. One of the most intriguing modern discoveries was the identification of massive underwater structures off the coast of various continents. Near the Japanese island of Yonaguni, divers found what appeared to be a vast stepped pyramid, complete with roads, pillars, and ceremonial platforms. The structure was carved from solid rock and showed clear signs of deliberate human construction. Yet it lay beneath 75 feet of water in an area that had been submerged for thousands of years. Similar underwater monuments were discovered off the coasts of India, the Caribbean, and the Mediterranean. While none of these structures matched the scale or sophistication that Plato attributed to Atlantis, they demonstrated that advanced civilizations had indeed existed in areas that were now underwater. The rising sea levels that followed the end of the last ice age, around 10,000 BCE, had submerged vast coastal areas where early human civilizations might have flourished. This discovery of underwater ruins coincided with new archaeological evidence that human civilization was far older and more sophisticated than previously believed. The excavation of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey revealed a massive temple complex that predated Stonehenge by thousands of years, demonstrating that hunter-gatherer societies were capable of monumental architecture and complex social organization. If such achievements were possible in the Neolithic period, perhaps Plato's timeline for Atlantis was not as impossible as scholars had assumed. Geological research also provided new insights into the kinds of catastrophes that might have inspired the Atlantis story. The study of volcanic supereruptions revealed that these events could indeed destroy entire civilizations within days or weeks. The eruption of Mount Toba in Indonesia, approximately 74,000 years ago, had caused a global climate catastrophe that nearly drove the human species to extinction. Similar events on a smaller scale had occurred throughout recorded history, demonstrating that natural disasters could indeed erase advanced civilizations from the historical record. The development of plate tectonics theory explained how entire landmasses could rise from or sink beneath the ocean over geological time periods. While these processes normally took millions of years, earthquakes and volcanic activity could cause rapid changes in local topography. The discovery of underwater mountain ranges and deep ocean trenches showed that the Earth's surface was far more dynamic and changeable than ancient peoples could have imagined. Computer modeling of ancient climate patterns revealed that the world of 10,000 BCE had been dramatically different from the modern environment. During the Ice Age, sea levels had been nearly 400 feet lower than today, exposing vast areas of continental shelf that were now underwater. As the glaciers melted and sea levels rose, these exposed areas would have been gradually submerged, forcing coastal civilizations to migrate inland or face destruction. Some researchers began to focus on these drowned coastal areas as possible locations for a historical Atlantis. The Doggerland region of the North Sea, which had once connected Britain to continental Europe, had supported thriving human communities before being submerged around 6500 BCE. Similar drowned landscapes existed off the coasts of every continent, and many would have been suitable for the development of advanced maritime civilizations. The Caribbean region attracted particular attention from Atlantis researchers due to its location in the Atlantic Ocean and its geological instability. The area was known for sudden changes in sea level, powerful hurricanes, and volcanic activity that could have provided the natural mechanisms for Atlantean destruction. Several researchers claim to have identified underwater structures in the Caribbean that might represent the remains of an advanced civilization, though these claims remain controversial and unproven. Edgar Cayce, the famous American psychic, had predicted in the early 20th century that Atlantis would rise again near the Bahamas and when pilots began reporting unusual underwater formations in that area during the 1960s, it sparked renewed interest in Caribbean Atlantis theories. The Bimini Road, a formation of limestone blocks arranged in what appeared to be a deliberate pattern, was hailed by some as evidence of Atlantean construction, though geologists generally attribute it to natural processes. The advent of satellite technology and GPS mapping allowed researchers to survey vast areas of ocean floor with unprecedented accuracy. These surveys revealed numerous underwater anomalies that sparked speculation about possible artificial structures. Sonar imaging detected what appeared to be roads, walls, and even pyramid-shaped formations on the sea bottom, though closer inspection usually revealed natural geological features that had been misinterpreted by enthusiastic researchers. DNA analysis added another dimension to Atlantis. Research by allowing scientists to trace the movements of ancient populations with remarkable precision. These studies revealed complex patterns of human migration that included several mysterious population movements that seemed to have no clear origin. Some researchers suggested that these genetic signatures might represent the dispersal of Atlantean refugees following their homeland's destruction, though such interpretations remained highly speculative. The development of deep-sea drilling technology allowed scientists to extract core samples from the ocean floor that preserved detailed records of ancient environmental conditions. These cores could reveal evidence of massive tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, and other catastrophic events that might have inspired flood legends in various cultures. While none of these discoveries provided direct evidence for Atlantis, they demonstrated that the ancient world had indeed experienced natural disasters of sufficient magnitude to destroy entire civilizations. As our scientific understanding of the Earth's history became more sophisticated, the question of Atlantis began to shift from simple matters of geographical location to deeper questions about the nature of human memory and the relationship between myth and reality. As our scientific understanding of the Earth's history became more sophisticated, the question of Atlantis began to shift from simple matters of geographical location to deeper questions about the nature of human memory and the relationship between myth and reality. Perhaps the most profound insight to emerge from centuries of Atlantis research was not any specific discovery about ancient civilizations, but rather the recognition that the human mind has a remarkable capacity to preserve important truths through the medium of storytelling, even when the literal details of those stories cannot be verified. Anthropologists studying oral traditions around the world discovered that many cultures preserve surprisingly accurate historical information through myths and legends that might appear purely fictional on the surface. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia, for example, have oral traditions that accurately describe geographical features and animal species that existed over 40,000 years ago, long before written history began. These stories, passed down through countless generations, preserve genuine memories of environmental changes that have since been confirmed by archaeological and geological evidence. Could the story of Atlantis represent a similar phenomena, a genuine historical memory that had been preserved and transformed through thousands of years of oral transmission before reaching Plato? This possibility gained credibility as researchers began to understand more about how traumatic events become embedded in cultural memory. Major disasters, particularly those that threaten the survival of entire communities, tend to be remembered with extraordinary vividness and detail, even as specific facts become distorted over time. The psychological impact of catastrophic flooding, in particular, seems to leave an indelible mark on human consciousness. Flood myths appear in virtually every culture on Earth, from the biblical story of Noah to the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, from Hindu Puranas to Native American creation stories. While these accounts vary dramatically in their details, they share common elements that suggest they might all derive from memories of actual flood events, possibly the massive flooding that occurred at the end of the last ice age. When melting glaciers raised sea levels and inundated coastal civilizations around the world. Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, proposed that certain symbols and story patterns were so universal that they must arise from what he called the collective unconscious, a shared psychological heritage that connects all human beings, regardless of their cultural background. The story of a golden age followed by moral decline and catastrophic punishment appears in so many different cultures that it might represent one of these archetypal patterns expressing fundamental truths about human nature and the cyclical patterns of history. From this perspective, the historical accuracy of Plato's account becomes less important than its psychological and symbolic truth. Whether or not Atlantis existed as a specific place and time, the story expresses genuine insights about the corrupting influence of power, the fragility of civilization, and the eternal human struggle between virtue and vice. The tale serves as a mirror in which each generation can examine its own achievements and failures, its own relationship with the natural world, and its own vulnerability to the forces of destruction. The enduring appeal of Atlantis also reflects something deeper about human psychology, our need to believe that perfection is possible, that somewhere and somewhen there existed a civilization that achieved what we can only dream of. This utopian impulse has driven countless attempts to create ideal societies, from Plato's own republic to the experimental communities of the 19th century to the technological dreams of the modern era. Atlantis represents the eternal might have been, the road not taken that continues to beckon us toward possibilities we have not yet achieved. But the story also serves as a warning about the dangers of such utopian thinking. The Atlanteans' belief in their own superiority, their conviction that they were destined to rule over lesser peoples, led directly to their destruction. The myth suggests that true perfection lies not in technological achievement or material abundance, but in moral wisdom and spiritual humility, qualities that become increasingly difficult to maintain as power and prosperity increase. Modern psychology has identified several cognitive biases that might explain why the Atlantis story continues to seem plausible to so many people. The reliability heuristic causes us to overestimate the likelihood of dramatic events that are easily remembered, while the confirmation bias leads us to notice evidence that supports our pre-existing beliefs while ignoring contradictory information. These mental shortcuts, which serve us well in many situations, can also lead us to see patterns and connections that don't actually exist. The narrative fallacy describes our tendency to create coherent stories from random or ambiguous information, filling in gaps in our knowledge with speculation that feels psychologically satisfying, even if it is not factually accurate. The fragmentary evidence surrounding Atlantis, the mysterious underwater structures, the ancient flood myths, the unexplained technological achievements of early civilizations provides just enough ambiguity to allow our pattern-seeking minds to construct compelling narratives that seem to confirm the reality of Plato's lost continent. Yet even if these psychological factors explain why people want to believe in Atlantis, they don't necessarily invalidate the search for historical truth behind the myth. The human capacity for self-deception is balanced by an equally powerful capacity for genuine discovery, and many myths that were once dismissed by scholars have since been validated by archaeological evidence. The city of Troy was considered purely fictional until Heinrich Schlienen's excavations proved its reality. The biblical account of the Hittite Empire was regarded as legendary until cuneiform tablets confirmed the existence of this powerful ancient civilization. The key to navigating between credulous acceptance and cynical dismissal lies in maintaining what scientists call methodological skepticism, a willingness to consider all possibilities, while insisting on rigorous evidence before drawing conclusions. This approach has led to some of the most exciting discoveries in Atlantis research, as investigators have learned to separate genuine anomalies that deserve further study from wishful thinking and misinterpreted data. As we drift deeper into the realm of sleep and dreams, Perhaps it's fitting that we should contemplate these questions about the relationship between reality and imagination, between the stories we tell ourselves and the truths they contain. As we drift deeper into the realm of sleep and dreams, perhaps it's fitting that we should contemplate these questions about the relationship between reality and imagination, between the stories we tell ourselves and the truths they contain. For in the end, the mystery of Atlantis may tell us as much about ourselves as it does about any ancient civilization. The search for Atlantis has always been, in many ways, a search for ourselves, for our origins, our potential, and our place in the grand sweep of history. When we imagine the gleaming towers of that lost continent rising from azure seas, when we picture its wise rulers, governing with justice, and its citizens living in harmony with nature, we are really imagining what we ourselves might become if we could transcend the limitations that seem to constrain us. This psychological dimension of the Atlantis story helps explain why it has inspired so many different interpretations over the centuries. Medieval Christians saw it as evidence of the biblical flood and God's judgment on sinful humanity. Renaissance explorers used it to justify their voyages to unknown lands, hoping to discover the lost continent or its survivors in the New World. Enlightenment philosophers found in it a parable about the rise and fall of civilizations, while Romantic poets saw it as a symbol of the sublime power of nature over human ambition. Each generation has rediscovered Atlantis and made it relevant to their own concerns and anxieties. In the Industrial Age, when people first began to worry about humanity's impact on the natural environment, Atlantis became a cautionary tale about the dangers of technological hubris. In the Atomic Age, when nuclear weapons raised the specter of global destruction, the story served as a warning about the consequences of power without wisdom. Today, as we face challenges of climate change, social inequality, and environmental degradation that echo the problems that supposedly led to Atlantis' downfall, the ancient story seems more relevant than ever. The Atlanteans' gradual transformation from wise guardians of their island paradise into aggressive exploiters of the natural world mirrors our own species' relationship with planet Earth. Their belief that technological advancement could solve all problems while moral development could be ignored reflects contemporary attitudes that many find troubling. Yet the story also offers hope because it suggests that wisdom can be learned from the mistakes of the past. If we can understand what went wrong in Atlantis, whether it was real or mythical perhaps, we can avoid repeating those errors in our own civilization. The tale reminds us that prosperity and power are not ends in themselves, but tools that must be used with responsibility and restraint. In our modern age of satellite imagery and deep-sea exploration, a search for Atlantis has taken on new dimensions that Plato could never have imagined. Every year brings fresh claims of discovery underwater ruins off the coast of Spain, mysterious formations in the Antarctic ice, geometric patterns on the ocean floor that might represent the remains of ancient construction. Each announcement is met with excitement from believers and skepticism from scientists, perpetuating the cycle of hope and disappointment that has characterized Atlantis research for generations. The Internet age has democratized the search for Atlantis, allowing amateur researchers from around the world to examine satellite images and share their theories with global audiences. Google Earth has become a new tool for treasure hunters who scan the ocean floors and remote landscapes looking for anomalies that might represent Atlantean ruins. While most of these discoveries turn out to be natural geological formations or image artifacts, the sheer volume of searching increases the chances that something genuinely significant might eventually be found. Professional archaeologists and oceanographers continue to make remarkable discoveries that, while not proving the existence of Atlantis, do demonstrate that the ancient world was far more sophisticated and interconnected than previously believed. The Antikythera mechanism, a complex bronze device discovered in a shipwreck off Greece, revealed that ancient peoples possessed knowledge of astronomy and engineering that rivals modern capabilities. Similar finds continue to push back the timeline of human technological achievement, suggesting that Plato's advanced Atlanteans might not have been as impossible as once thought. The mapping of underwater archaeological sites has revealed evidence of sophisticated civilizations that flourished in areas now submerged by rising seas. Off the coast of India, marine archaeologists have discovered the remains of cities that were clearly planned and constructed with advanced engineering knowledge. These underwater ruins demonstrate that the idea of lost civilizations beneath the waves is not merely fantasy. It represents a genuine aspect of human history that is only now beginning to be understood. Climate research has provided new insights into the kinds of catastrophic events that might have inspired flood myths throughout human culture. Scientists have identified evidence of massive tsunami events in the geological record, some caused by underwater landslides, others by volcanic eruptions or asteroid impacts. These discoveries show that the ancient world did indeed experience natural disasters of sufficient magnitude to destroy entire civilizations and leave lasting impressions in human memory. The study of genetic markers has revealed complex patterns of ancient human migration that include several mysterious population movements with no clear origin. Some researchers have suggested that these genetic signatures might represent the dispersal of survivors from a destroyed civilization, though such interpretations remain highly speculative. What is clear is that human history includes many episodes of sudden cultural change and population movement that are not yet fully understood. Perhaps more intriguingly, recent research into the nature of human memory and oral tradition has shown that cultures can preserve accurate historical information for far longer periods than previously believed. Australian Aboriginal oral traditions have been found to contain accurate descriptions of environmental changes that occurred over 10,000 years ago, demonstrating that it is theoretically possible for memories of Ice Age events to survive into the historical period. This research raises fascinating questions about the relationship between myth and memory. Could the flood stories found in cultures around the world represent genuine memories of the catastrophic flooding that occurred at the end of the last ice age? Could the stories of golden ages and lost civilizations preserve memories of early human societies that achieved levels of sophistication that were subsequently lost during periods of climate upheaval? The philosophical implications of these questions extend far beyond the specific case of Atlantis. They touch on fundamental issues about the nature of knowledge, the reliability of cultural transmission, and the relationship between scientific investigation and traditional wisdom. If oral traditions can preserve accurate information across millennia, then perhaps we need to take ancient stories more seriously as potential sources of historical insight. Yet the danger of this approach lies in the temptation to abandon critical thinking in favor of wishful speculation. The fact that some myths contain historical truth does not mean that all myths are literally accurate. The challenge lies in developing methods for distinguishing between genuine historical memories and purely imaginative creations, between symbolic truths and factual claims. This challenge is complicated by the fact that human psychology is remarkably susceptible to pattern recognition errors and confirmation bias. We are naturally inclined to see connections and meanings in random events, to construct coherent narratives from fragmentary evidence, and to interpret ambiguous information in ways that support our pre-existing beliefs. These tendencies, which serve us well in many contexts, can lead us astray when we're trying to evaluate claims about lost civilizations and ancient mysteries. The scientific method provides tools for overcoming these cognitive biases, but it requires discipline and patience to apply these tools consistently. It means being willing to abandon attractive theories when the evidence doesn't support them, and being open to possibilities that might initially seem unlikely or uncomfortable. Most importantly, it means maintaining a careful balance between healthy skepticism and destructive cynicism, being critical enough to avoid deception while remaining open enough to recognize genuine discoveries. As we near the end of our journey through the mystery of Atlantis, Perhaps it's time to step back and consider what this ancient story really means for us today. Whether Plato was recording genuine history, creating philosophical allegory, or crafting pure fiction, he gave us something far more valuable than mere facts. He gave us a mirror in which to examine our own civilization and our own choices about how to live on this earth. The story of Atlantis speaks to something eternal in the human experience. Our longing for perfection, our fear of loss, and our complex relationship with the power we create. Every generation faces the same fundamental challenges that supposedly confronted the Atlanteans. How to use prosperity wisely, how to balance individual desires with collective needs, how to remain humble in the face of success, and how to live in harmony with the natural world that sustains us. In our own time, these challenges have taken on unprecedented urgency. We possess technologies that would seem magical to ancient peoples. We command energies that dwarf anything available to previous civilizations. And we have the capacity to reshape the planet itself according to our desires. Yet with this power comes responsibility, and with this knowledge comes the sobering awareness that our choices today will determine the fate of countless future generations. The Atlantean tragedy, as Plato tells it, was not that they lacked wisdom or capability, but that they gradually lost sight of the values that had made their achievements possible. They became so focused on expanding their power and accumulating wealth that they forgot the virtues of justice, moderation, and respect for the divine order that governs all existence. In pursuing material success, they abandoned spiritual wisdom, and in seeking to dominate others, they lost their connection to the sacred principles that had guided their ancestors. This pattern, the rise and fall of civilizations, through moral decay rather than external conquest, appears throughout human history. The Romans, the Maya, the various Chinese dynasties, the great maritime empires of Europe all achieved remarkable heights of power and sophistication before succumbing to internal contradictions and corruption. The specific details vary, but the underlying dynamic remains constant. Prosperity breeds arrogance, power corrupts judgment, and societies that lose touch with their founding values ultimately destroy themselves. Yet the story of Atlantis is not entirely pessimistic. Embedded within the tale of destruction is a vision of what human civilization can achieve when it operates according to proper principles. The early Atlanteans in Plato's account created a society of remarkable beauty and justice, a place where technology served human, flourishing where government promoted the common good, and where people lived in harmony with both the natural world and the divine order. This vision continues to inspire us because it suggests that such achievements are not impossible, only difficult. The potential for creating wise and just societies exists within human nature. The challenge lies in maintaining the moral clarity and spiritual insight necessary to realize that potential. The story reminds us that external success means nothing without internal wisdom, that technological advancement is meaningless without ethical development, and that true civilization consists not in the accumulation of power, but in the cultivation of virtue. As you drift towards sleep tonight, let your mind wander through the scenes we have explored together. Picture the concentric rings of that mysterious island, its temples gleaming in the Mediterranean sun, its harbors filled with ships from distant lands. Imagine the wise kings meeting in the temple of Poseidon, swearing their ancient oaths of justice and moderation. Feel the weight of their responsibility, the burden of governing wisely, the constant struggle to balance competing demands and maintain moral clarity in the face of overwhelming temptation. But also imagine the moment when everything changed, when prosperity began to corrupt their hearts, when power started to cloud their judgment, when the divine spark within them began to dim. Feel the tragedy of this transformation, the slow slide from wisdom to folly, from justice to oppression, from harmony to chaos. And finally, imagine the terrible moment of reckoning when the earth itself rose up to reclaim what had been given, when the sea swallowed their achievements and left only memory as testimony to their former greatness. Whether this story describes events that actually occurred somewhere in the depths of prehistory, or whether it represents the imaginative creation of a philosophical genius, it contains truths that remain as relevant today as they were when Plato first spoke these words to his students in ancient Athens. The mystery of Atlantis endures not because we need to find its physical remains, but because we need to understand its spiritual message. In the end, perhaps that is the greatest treasure that the search for Atlantis has to offer, not the discovery of golden cities beneath the waves, but the rediscovery of timeless wisdom about how to live well on this earth. The true Atlantis may not be a place we can visit with submarines and underwater cameras, but a state of being we can achieve through careful attention to the moral and spiritual dimensions of human existence. As the gentle waves of sleep begin to wash over your consciousness, carrying you toward the peaceful depths of rest, let the mystery of Atlantis remind you that every ending contains the seed of a new beginning, that every loss opens the possibility for new discoveries, and that every civilization, including our own, has the opportunity to choose wisdom over folly, justice over oppression, and harmony over chaos. The story of Atlantis will continue as long as humans dream of creating perfect societies and worry about losing what they have built. It will evolve and adapt each new generation's concerns, serving as both inspiration and warning for those who seek to understand the relationship between power and responsibility, between human ambition and divine justice, between the civilizations we create and the natural world that sustains us all. Sleep well and dream of the wisdom that endures beyond the rise and fall of continents, beyond the turning of ages, beyond the eternal dance of memory and myth that shapes our understanding of who we are and who we might become. The sea keeps its secrets, but the stories we tell about those secrets reveal the deepest truths about ourselves.